if one goes backwards in time, virtually every civilization on the planet and all the major continents, Pacific Islands, and just about everywhere you went, three basic tenets were always consistent with the spiritual mythos or the kind of culture of the time. You know, all living things are interconnected, life comes beyond the human body, and that in many cases they saw the planet sort of like a living system that we're connected to. Now, I'm not going to say these are random thoughts or just people sitting around making things up, but why it would be so consistent, so ubiquitous across all boundaries of language, race, ethnicity, etc., the same exact phenomenon every time was seen as like the central theme of life, as it were. There must be something to this. And so now here we are thousands of years later, and we are building instruments that can sort of measure this process. So it does suggest something's there, okay? So if that's the case, we've already shown that photonic entanglement really works, and we can use it for crypto systems and other things which I won't mention. And now that we're beginning to discover that there's a photonic aspect to neurochemistry, well, doesn't that suggest perhaps, just maybe, that there's a kind of a biophysical, quantum physical interface that happens with one's thoughts, with one's intention? Right. And that's what Roger Nelson was trying to establish with his experiments. And of course, there's been a lot of other folks, Rupert Sheldrake's probably the most well-known, who's done a lot of experiments where they've had bacteria in dishes, and they've had, you know, microbes moving around as a function of thought, all kinds of things like this. So the point is, if we're about to tap into that area of science, and now that we have nanotechnology available to construct things at the molecular scale of precision, you can build devices using certain kinds of organic molecules. There's a chip I have in mind for this purpose that can actually show these things as they occur. Could we not at some point begin to attach this directly to humans in some way to build a kind of not just an interface like where you wear a sensor on your head and you can think a thought and make a device move around, but rather your thoughts would actually entangle other thoughts as a collective process? That's the next big thing in science, in my humble opinion. Yeah. The flip side of that coin says, could it be used for something terrible? Yeah, probably so. But like every other technology that we've ever come across in our history as a civilization, it's like a tool. You know, you take a hammer, you can build a house with a hammer, you can bonk in somebody's head with it. Same exact deal in this case, only it's a much larger scale. But that's the next step in our ladder, as I say today.
Wow, that is a head full. And so how would you like to entangle with somebody else's thoughts right now, Charles?
Wait, if I... Okay, hi there.
Hold on. I actually have a caller. I have a caller that's called in. I believe they're from New Mexico, if I can recognize the area code. You're on the air. What's your name, and what would you like to talk to Charles about?
Oh, no. No, the computer was staticky, so I called so I could hear. Hi, Charles. I'm enjoying listening to you. I wasn't planning on saying anything, though.
Well, that's all right. Go ahead and speak your mind. It's fine.
That I'm Tamara. Hi.
This is Charles. This is my friend T2 down in New Mexico.
Oh, cool.
And she's incredibly bright, a researcher in her own right. And if you want to entangle with someone's consciousness,
by all means.
Feel
free to entangle, dear. I mean, I've been in Mexico many times. It's a wonderful place. It's very beautiful, and I was just there actually last year, and I gave a talk at something called the Tesla Tech Conference, which is
Charles, she's a wonderful node. So let's hear what she has to say.
Cool. Yeah, please, by all means, go for it.
Yeah.
You're putting me on the spot again, Robert.
I know.
That's okay.
I really just wanted to hear the static on the internet was, I don't know what
there is something bad. Yeah, I must say, every couple of minutes there was a burst of static, so it might be Skype or something, but it was kind of fuzzy there for a bit.
Yeah, so I shut the thing off and I went, okay, I won't hear the show, and then I went, no, I want to hear the show, so I'll just dial in. So I've missed some of it because of the static, but anyway, what do you want to talk about?
What was there any particular
I wasn't aware that you were, so this is a problem. The static piece is a problem that I incur when I have, people of note on my show. And, and I've talked to Blog Talk Radio about it. And unfortunately, they go home after like 4 o'clock East Coast time on Sunday. And the only way that I can bring it to their attention is if they are there in the office while I'm actually doing this show. And unfortunately, they're not there. So, we tend to have these moments while, they're away from the office. And I apologize for that. And I hope that it hasn't kept other people away from listening to the show, Tamara.
It's hard to hear, it's hard to follow the conversation on online. Do you record it without
I
the
do.
static?
Yeah, there's a podcast for this, and all my shows are archived, and you'll have to get through the third eye splitting white noise moments. But once you do,
You can't record it without that, like from your home.
Unfortunately, no. This is all happening in real time, so whatever happens, happens. I have I have no control over it.
This is reality radio.
Yeah, staticky empathy. It's cool.
Well, it's a bit of that chaos coming through.
So Charles, go ahead, Charles.
I don't know. I think your friend is about to ask something.
Well, no, I was going to say that Tamara, I want to fill it like just a little bit of the sort of the backhoe here on Tamara. Tamara is a researcher in her own right.
Okay.
And Tamara has spent hundreds, if not thousands, of hours working the Freedom of Information channel pipeline, particularly around ET stuff. Am I right, Tamara?
Okay. The remote viewing thing is what I worked on, really, and that was kind of a quirk when they finally released all that. Mm-hmm. It was on 14 CDs, just dumped out willy-nilly with file names that were like 16 or 18 digits. They made no logical sense. And so when I started looking through the information, I thought, well, I'd like to come back to this document. It's a 300-page book, on Qigong or whatever. But there was no way to really remember what was where. So I started just making an annotated index. And I didn't realize how much information was there. It was quite a large project, but it was all anomalous cognition, anything the government pulled together in that program.
Well, I will say for others that I've known personally who actually have worked with freedom of information research, they make it complex on purpose. You have to actually know the exact reference numbers and the search criteria. Otherwise, you'll never find what you're looking for. And then they do it on purpose, by the way. That's not by accident.
Oh, I know. It was clear that they did that on purpose, and so I just said, well, I'm going to take the time and make it useful to people. And,
in your search for remote viewing, there's also something called remote influencing, which is kind of what Robert and I were just talking about a few minutes ago.
Right.
Did you find anything that you found particularly noteworthy that you sort of came to mind as the
to be
most
frank,
done or something like that?
Most of what I saw in there, I guess just because of my own background and years of meditating. I mean, I heard about remote viewing rather late. It was 2002. And, I had my own experiences in studying, neurobiology, and I'm pretty empathic. What I found in there, in a lot of ways, seems superficial to me. And they redacted a lot. So as far as remote influence, you'd have to sort of read between the lines, like some of the Chinese documents that got transcribed, into English. Some of that would be there. There was one really cool thing about how the Chinese were training children to see through their hands or see through.
I've heard this before. In fact, Ed Davis talked about this at length. So he verified the exact same thing. Yeah.
So there's a lot of stuff in there, but you almost have to be, meticulous and read into it from prior knowledge or from other things. And so, but
I think you're on the right trail. If I could just throw this one in there, back in the days when the Soviet Union was still the Soviet Union, we had our team here. There was a group of folks at SRI, Stanford Research International, just a few miles from where I live, and Russell Targ and some other folks are Hal Puthoff and that collection of folks. I know these guys. I've actually talked to them many times. They were part of that team. And then, of course, they got defunded, or that's what they say. And I've talked to Russell. He's quite old now, but he's still active in this kind of thing.
He's a sweetie.
And he's an interesting guy. But the point I wanted to make was, when the Soviet Union dissolved, they had a huge, like I was saying to Robert in the past hour, they had a huge surplus of research, people, scientists, and technical teams, including this area of research. And China was very big on sort of, buying these guys up. After with Yeltsin and everything, and the economy is in complete free fall, China and the U.S. were sort of in a race. It was almost like Project Paperclip after World War II, sort of that kind of thing,
right.
but in the modern version. And so I was just telling Robert, I had worked on something called the IPP, Initiative for Proliferation Prevention, and we actually got a lot of their nuclear and sort of rocket scientists to our side.
Wait a minute, I can't think as fast as you said that. Initiative
for Proliferation Prevention, or IPP. Look it up on the web. You'll see a lot of research materials on that.
Okay.
So the whole point was, and my background's in energy research and material science, so I did a lot of work with former Soviet military scientists who came here to translate their expertise into things that were more interesting, like wind turbines and fuel cells and that kind of stuff. But in the meantime, China was really big on buying up the scientists they could find. And since our side didn't seem to have much interest in remote viewing, quote unquote, China was very much on top of this. In fact, they absolutely did everything they could to court and get as many of these Soviet scientists as they possibly could. So it's completely logical and reasonable that China would be probably the largest purveyor of the sort of militaristic or militarized version of this, and that's exactly what they're doing. And so your research does verify that quite.
Yeah, and that explains why what I saw coming out of China in all those documents really was of most interest to me. Not that put-offs. I mean, there was good stuff. Targan put.
Yeah,
there
of course.
were some good papers.
Yeah.
But the Chinese stuff was like, all right, they're really laying it out here of, things that I've experienced and understand, coming from the other side, coming from the meditative side, powers of mind stuff. But I would just love to see it all come together. It's good to know you're a material scientist.
Well, I would too, and I'll give you a clue that might be sort of interesting. There's a class of proteins called rhodopsins, and they're quite commonly known in nature. You can also find rhodopsins in the fovea of the human eye. Rhodopsins are a photoreactive protein. And the reason I make that point is because if one went to make a chip or a device that would indicate quantum containment via a photonic interaction, that'd be one of the chemistries worth looking at. And so when I was actually talking with Russell Targ about 6 years ago now, I was at a remote viewing conference in Nevada. And there he was giving a talk. And so I said to Russell afterwards, and said, well, by the way, I'm looking at certain chemistry as a way to get at this process. Which chemistry did you think of looking at? And the first thing he said was rhodopsin. So this kind of suggests there's something to it. So I'm going to guess that there are people building devices now based on a biochemical or nanobiological approach using some kind of rhodopsin-based chemistry as a potential effect or interface.
Can you hear me?
Just barely. There's a lot of static on
that. That static is really awful, but I wrote that down. I'll research that. I only heard bits of what you were saying.
Okay.
But rhodopsin, is that what? R-O-D-I?
Yeah, actually it's R-H. R-H-O-D-I-S-T-I-N.
R-H-O-D-O-S-I-N?
Yeah, rhodopsin. R-H-O-D-I-T-I-N.
Charles, Tamara's one of my Facebook friends, and you guys, what's really interesting. I just want to interject here for a moment. When I first met Tamara online, it was in conjunction with ions.
Oh, right.
Really?
That's
true. Cool.
Yeah, this is actually a funny story, and if we can cut through the static.
Oh, by all means, go for it. Why not?
So, I'm friends with Dean Radin on Facebook.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
And so Dean had posted this very innocuous post about eating a donut.
Eating a donut, okay.
Yeah, eating a donut. And, he
was just saying he enjoyed this donut he just ate.
It was very innocuous. He enjoyed this donut.
Okay.
So I guess there are these ions, groupies that got on there, and they were taking Dean to task about eating this donut.
And being a bad influence on all of us followers.
Oh my gosh, heaven forbid
that can't
that donut.
think for ourselves, and we'll eat donuts too.
As a sideline, just if I can burst in, when I was working here at Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, I was there for about 10 years. I used to work at night sometimes because that's when they would turn the accelerator on and had these big experiments. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd head down the hill to a place called Dream Fluff Donuts. I'm not kidding. At 3 o'clock in the morning, they had their first batch of glazed donuts, in the bubbling pot of oil or whatever. And I get them as they were hot. They just pull them right out of the thing. And boy, I was hooked. I was a hardcore donut addict. So I had my donut days.